Once again, I am joined with a man who has such an incredible amount of experience. He shared in our last episode of the Future Forecast podcast his spiritual journey as he made his way through understanding our greater reality and his own place in it. Sean Mahoney, the new host of the Future Forecasting Debrief. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Dennis. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to have part two of our conversation. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit more about remote viewing. I thought we'd get to that in the last podcast, but you had such a neat story about your children seeing ghosts and kind of exploring that perspective. And I want to get into how that you landed up with remote viewing, which led you to the future forecasting group. So you mentioned it briefly that you had this interest and you went out and you learned it. But can you start us off there and talking about really what that journey was like for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually saw The Men Who Stare at Goats, and I
That's a
was
great
already
movie.
having these these experiences, and I started going to that meetup group that I was telling you about, where the
Yeah,
the psychic and the spiritual and the paranormal stuff were being discussed.
right.
And in the beginning of that movie, there's a tagline that it starts with, and it says, "More of this is true than you would believe." And
Yeah,
that hit me like a freight train. When I saw
yeah.
that, and then I watched the movie, I thought, I have got to learn more about this remote viewing. I
Hmm.
think I went to the library the next day and I got Joe McMoneagle's book, Remote Viewing Secrets, and I read it
Yeah,
cover to cover. And um, I was a little disappointed. I was glued to the book, but I was a little disappointed it didn't teach me how to do it. And
right,
so I was like,
right.
I need to learn how to do this. And I think it was maybe a week later that I was at the bookstore. Um, and if you've ever had a book jump off the shelf at you, I had
Oh,
one of those experiences
many
where
times. Yes.
it's like somebody grabbed my eyes and pulled me up here
Hmm.
to the corner where David Morehouse's book, that it's kind of like an instruction manual
Uh-huh.
on CRV. And so I bought that book, read it cover to cover twice, and I
Yeah.
tried my first session. And I still remember that my target was it was a mosque somewhere in the Middle East with a really unique construction. It was kind of like an Adobe, um, like mud brick type construction,
Right.
and it had these wood beams sticking out of it that they kind of looked. They weren't spikes, but they kind of looked like spikes the way they were
Right.
sticking out of the structure. And in the session, I drew like a railroad tie, and I was like, it's just a long piece of wood. And I
Right.
remember feeling like I was in a cave, like this really earthy, like being in the earth type of a feeling, and like that
Right.
would be like being in an Adobe building. And so I had all these little, I mean, I didn't have an amazing session of like, oh my God, I drew the mosque exactly, but I saw all
Right.
these elements in the session that registered with the target. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh my God, this is real. And
Yeah.
so I did use, after learning from a book, um, you have questions, but
Of course.
there's no instructor to ask the questions to.
Hmm.
And it was uh, just doing research online is when I found Teresa Frisch, who lived in Troy, Ohio, which is not that far north of Dayton. So I had an instructor that was in my area, and I reached out to her, and my wife and another friend from work took the training class with me.
Hmm.
And she came to our house and did the teaching. And I had already had some uh, David Morehouse. Like I basically learned the basics. And Lynn Buchanan's methodology is slightly different. You use a different ideogram technique, and
Hmm.
the way that it's just nuances. It was mostly the same.
Right.
But I developed more after having the in-person training because I had somebody I could talk to and ask questions to, and got into IRVA. Because you get an IRVA trial
Hmm.
membership when
Right.
you're a student. So for those of you
Yeah.
who have taken training, you can go and get a free 1 year membership at IRVA. And
Yeah.
yeah, got I think the first conference I went to was in 2015, and that was down in um, New Orleans. And
Okay.
I think I met Glenn at that conference for the first time, and I was really just fascinated with the HRVG methodology. I
Right.
really wanted to learn as much as I could, and so because I learned the Morehouse CRV, I learned the Buchanan CRV,
Hmm.
but this HRVG methodology was really different. But I had seen the videos with Dick
Yeah.
doing, work for Farsight,
Yeah.
and the little Nemo icon just fascinated me. Like, what is he doing with that? Like, what? How is he so good? I remember that I was driving to work one day, and I'm right by where I live in Dayton, Ohio. We have the Air Force Museum here,
Hmm.
and they were having some sort of an event where these like World War II planes were flying over and landing at the museum. It was some event back in like I want to say it was 2012 or 13, and so this event was going on. Now I'm not a plane buff. I'm not a World War
Right.
II buff. But this was an event that I was just like, there was all these people pulling their cars off to the side of the road. They were all lined around the fence and looking at it and, taking pictures. And I was just like, I felt compelled to pull over and take a look, even though that's not really my thing.
Right.
And so I did. I pulled over and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I got the time. So I got out and I walked up to the fence and I felt this like exhilaration and excitement.
Yeah.
And I had this realization in the moment. I was like, wait a minute. I was like, this isn't mine. Like, I don't
Yeah.
feel this way, but I'm feeling what these people are feeling. And I was just like, oh my God, I am empathic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I started to pay attention, like when, like my boss would come in and he was pissed off about something that I felt irritable. I'm like, wait a minute,
Hmm.
I'm not pissed. That I was like, oh my God, all this time throughout my life, I would feel something that I
Hmm.
was picking up and I would just own it like, oh, this is me. And I would
Right.
just
You don't know.
assume
You don't
that's how I
recognize that it's someone else's emotions until you start
right.
really paying attention to it. You don't understand it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when we get caught up in the mentality of like the herd, right?
Hmm.
It takes a conscious effort to like take a step back and say, wait a
Yeah.
minute, is this me or is this them? And if it's
Yeah.
not me, then correct it. Like just kind of okay, that's not
Hmm.
me. Center yourself and like, all right, where am I at in this? Like, what do I feel about this? And it helps
Right.
you to kind of not get caught up in, like I said, that herd mentality.